My name is Isaac William. I was born in Jerusalem, a city I love and hate at the same time. My father was a rabbi, my mother, a quiet woman with hands always covered in flour and a heart full of psalms. I grew up between the Tanakh and the alleys of Mahana Yehuda market, between the scent of Shabbat bread and the incessant clang of theological discussions. I studied ancient history, graduated from the Hebrew University, and for over 20 years, I sought the truth in texts, in dates, in fragments, but never in people's eyes. Until June 27, 2025, I didn't believe that God still spoke. Or rather, I didn't believe He spoke to someone like me. I was convinced that the world was now dominated by spiritual illusions, by religions vying for truth as warring peoples contend for land. I looked at Christians with suspicion, divided theatrically with their charismatic preachers and their churches that resembled theaters. Yet for months, I felt an inexplicable pressure inside, like a mute trumpet sounding only for me. The previous week had been strangely heavy. I had trouble sleeping. I often dreamed of an empty room with an open window and a wind calling my name. A voice I didn't recognize but that resonated within my chest, as if my heart knew more than my mind was willing to accept. On the evening of June 27th, the sun was setting behind the stone walls. There was that liquid gold that only Jerusalem can offer. I walked slowly towards the hotel at the western wall. I do this often, but that day it wasn't a religious pilgrimage. It was more of a need. I didn't know what I was looking for. Perhaps peace, perhaps answers. The plaza was almost empty. Some tourists, a group of young people with dark kippas and bright eyes, an old man kissing the stone as one kisses a mother. I approached respectfully, but without fervor. I placed my hands on the wall. It was cold, always the same, immovable for centuries, as if nothing in the world could shake it. Then my heart began to beat faster, not from emotion, not from prayer, but like a dull drum. I tried to breathe. I couldn't. The world began to tremble, not outside but within. A dizziness seized my stomach. I saw the Hebrew letters on the wall merge into a language I didn't know but understood. They spoke of fire, of wind, of judgment, and of a date. That same date, that evening, I knelt. Someone asked me if I was okay. I tried to answer, but my lips wouldn't move. I felt the blood drain from my face. Sounds became muffled. The sky turned white. The walls in front of me bent as if they were wax. I remember the taste of copper in my mouth. I remember a child running with a red kite and then stopping to look at me. Still, I remember the outstretched hands of a man trying to help me and his eyes filling with fear. Then nothing. Only a deep sacred silence, as if I had fallen into a well where not even thoughts echoed. And it was there, in that timeless instant, that my end began, or perhaps my beginning. I can't explain how it happened. I didn't see a tunnel. There was no light at the end, nor angels to greet me with trumpets and spread wings. Yet I knew I was beyond or beneath or inside something that no longer belonged to the world I knew. It was as if I had been sucked out of time, emptied of all physical weight, but still perfectly aware of myself. I was Isaac, but I wasn't anymore. Around me there were no walls, no sky, only a living, pulsating space which seemed made of the same substance as silence. I breathed without lungs. I heard without ears. It was as if my spirit had eyes, skin, and memory. In that unreal suspension, I noticed something approaching. First like a shadow in the fog, then like a presence. It was not menacing but not reassuring either. It was sacred, inevitable. Before me appeared a man, or at least he seemed so. But as soon as I looked into his eyes, I understood that he was not a man like us. Those eyes, they had no end. They did not contain time but transcended it. They were fire that does not burn, ocean that does not drown. And when he spoke, his voice was not a sound, it was an impact. Every word descended into my chest like an electric current awakening something I had long forgotten. "Isaac," he said, "you have crossed the veil, but you are not here to die. You are here to see." I didn't have time to answer. An invisible wind lifted me and I found myself suspended above the earth, but not as seen in photographs. It was alive, breathing, emitting a low continuous sound like a lament. Then the vision narrowed. I began to see faces, millions. Some were sleeping, others walked like blind people under the sun. Men, women, young, old, and among them, Christians. And there, Something happened that I could never have imagined. A date formed in the sky made of red light. June 27th, 2025. At that instant, a trumpet ripped through the silence like a blade. It was not a trumpet of war. It was a call, a celestial call, and it resonated everywhere. I saw some Christians rise from the earth, not physically, but as if their souls were sucked upwards, passing through veils of fire and light. Their bodies trembled, but not from fear. It was as if an invisible force was clothing them in a glory that cannot be explained in words. Others, however, remained still. Some cried, others seemed confused. They touched their hearts as if searching for something they couldn't find. Some cried out, but the trumpet did not reach them. Why? I asked with a lump in my throat. Why some and not others? The man looked at me, and for an instant his face seemed pierced, as if he carried an ancient sorrow. Because many have known my name, but not my heart. They have spoken of me, but not with me. They have built temples to be seen, but they have not let me in. The vision widened. I saw cities and spiritual flames, churches falling into ruin, and others shining like lighthouses. Some small, hidden in deserts and suburbs, were the brightest. I saw simple men without titles receiving crowns of light. And I saw others dressed in earthly glory, crying on their knees because heaven did not recognize them. The time of separation, he said again. Not to condemn, but to purify. The day is near, Isaac, and you must tell it. And at that moment, I knew I could no longer return to my old life. Even if I returned to the living, something inside me had been marked with fire and truth. I never imagined that spiritual authority could be something tangible. In my rational historian's mind, authority was a word linked to ancient texts, to religious hierarchies, to power codified by men and traditions. But what was shown to me in that vision shattered all my ideas. True authority is not seen in clothes, titles, or pulpits. It is an invisible weight that rests on the shoulders of those who have been broken in secret, purified in the fire of anonymity, nailed to the altar of renunciation. The scene changed. I was as if transported above the surface of the world. But I no longer looked at it from the outside. I felt it. I perceived its soft groan like a wounded creature awaiting something. And amidst that groan, I saw the Christians. Not all, not in mass, only some. Ordinary men and women, semi-hidden in forgotten places. A Nigerian mother praying in the night beside an empty bed. A young missionary in a South American alley, dirty and tired, but with a bright gaze. An old woman in an abandoned house in Detroit, singing psalms in a broken voice while scrubbing the floor. And then an invisible hand touched them one by one as if to mark them. A warm light enveloped them, and I heard the voice explain to me, "These are those who allowed themselves to be broken. They did not seek visibility but my voice. They did not ask for power but communion." It was then that I saw something I had never conceived, the transfer of authority. It was not a public ceremony. It did not happen in cathedrals nor in the halls of ecclesiastical power. It happened in secret. It was as if God was taking a mantle from some who had worn it for ambition, for vanity, or for tradition, and placing it on the shoulders of others, unknown but ready. A famous priest fell to his knees as if emptied. A preacher with thousands of followers stopped speaking. Their voices died out. And in their place, simple true words arose, charged with a power that came not from rhetoric but from surrender. One of them, a thin man with deep eyes and sun-marked skin, raised his hands and began to speak. No one listened to him in reality, but in the spiritual world, his voice was like thunder. He only said, "Your will be done, Lord, even if it costs me everything." And at that instant, I saw the heavens open above him. Nothing visible had happened in the world, but in the kingdom of the Spirit, a shift had occurred. I felt it inside like a silent earthquake. Authority was no longer where we thought it was. It had passed elsewhere, to the small, to the hidden, to the faithful without fame. "This is the day," the voice beside me said, "when thrones will be overturned. The first will be last, and the last will rise, not to be glorified, but to bear the weight of my movement." On earth, I turned. The face of the man speaking to me was lined with tears, but his tears were like crystals shining with truth. And I understood that day, June 27th, was not chosen by chance. It was a day written in heaven, but visible only to those who have eyes to see. And I, Isaac Cohen, a skeptical Jew, had witnessed it. I don't know how to describe it other than this. It was as if time itself had caught fire. It didn't burn the skin, but every preconceived notion of how God acted. Days were no longer days. Years folded. Seasons condensed into moments. The spiritual world was changing its rhythm, and those who weren't in tune would find themselves out of step, like someone dancing to music they no longer heard. I was shown a field cracked by the sun. The earth seemed dead, abandoned by every promise. Then I saw hands, invisible hands, sowing tears there, not water tears. And as soon as those drops touched the soil, flowers sprouted, not one at a time, but all at once, as if someone had flipped a switch. That was the symbol, but immediately afterward I saw the real thing. Christians who had prayed for years without answers now received in days what they had awaited for a lifetime. Ministries that seemed suspended in the limbo of preparation were activated as if they had received a military command. Marriages mended. Forgotten callings awakened as from a deep sleep. There were people who had walked in silence for years, performing small acts of obedience like gathering crumbs of heaven without knowing if they would ever feed anyone. Now those crumbs became multiplied bread. This is the time of acceleration, I was told. It is not for everyone, but for those who have allowed themselves to be prepared. It wasn't a wild race. It wasn't agitation. It was order, precision, direction. Everything found its place, as if God were moving chess pieces with the calm of one who has already won the game. Some doors that had been closed for years swung open with a simple touch. Divine encounters happened suddenly. A phone call, a person sitting next to you on the bus, a shared glance during a prayer, and there something was triggered, as if heaven itself said, "Now." I saw an old man who had prayed for his son's salvation for 30 years. He was tired, worn, but faithful. And in that accelerated hour, the son knelt alone in his room, with no one speaking to him. Tears and cries, then peace. It had happened in silence, but the effect was like a spiritual earthquake. The acceleration did not come as a reward for those who had worked the hardest, but as a sign for those who were aligned. It was not about effort, but about position. Those who had hidden in secret, who had walked far from the limelight, who had chosen God's voice instead of the echo of men, were now projected forward with a speed that defied logic. But why now, I asked. The voice answered firmly, because the time of waiting is over, because what is coming requires people who are already ready, not souls to awaken. And as the images flashed before, I understood that it was not just about blessings, but about responsibility. God was entrusting new burdens to those who had learned to carry crosses in silence. Time had narrowed not for convenience, but for fulfillment. Everything had its hour, and this was the hour of movement. In the air, there was an unspoken phrase, clear as fire. If you do not move now, you will lose the pace of heaven. And I, who had always lived as an observer, felt for the first time that the Spirit was asking me to enter the race, not as a spectator, but as a witness. I had just begun to grasp the extent of the acceleration when the vision changed in tone, not abruptly, but with the solemnity of a wind that suddenly rises and changes the smell of the air. It was as if an invisible drum had begun to beat deep within the earth, announcing that what was to be awakened would now also be shaken. I saw an imposing church made of glass and concrete, with spotlights, screens, and a stage. It was full of people. It seemed alive. But suddenly, a tremor passed through it. No physical earthquake, no architectural collapse. It was a spiritual tremor starting from the foundations. The shining walls began to exude darkness, as if the glass were revealing every hidden compromise. The pastor on stage spoke, but his words became smoke. People applauded, but their hands began to tremble. Some left. Others remained, unable to understand what was happening. Then I saw other places, prayer rooms, homes, offices, remote communities. And that same shaking reached them. It was not destructive for everyone. Some trembled but remained standing. Others collapsed internally, as if every certainty built on talent, appearance, or applause was being stripped away like paint from a rotten wall. And each time I heard the voice say, "It is not judgment, it is mercy." The Lord was removing masks, not just from pulpits, but from souls. Every duplicity, every word spoken to please rather than to obey, every sermon given for control and not for love was brought to light. I saw ministers fall to their knees, broken. Some cried and repented. Others hardened, stood up, and turned their backs on the light. Their faces grew darker, as if something within them had been extinguished definitively. Then I was shown a young woman. She was alone in a room, kneeling beside an unmade bed. She had a notebook full of tears and underlined verses. No one knew her. No one followed her. Yet when the shaking reached her, she did not waver. The entire room trembled, but she remained still. The voice said, "She built on the rock." I then understood that the true divide was not between the famous and the anonymous, but between the sincere and the superficial. The fire was not sent to destroy, but to reveal. Ministries built on hype fell like card castles. Fake relationships, those that hid convenience behind words of God, broke apart. Families where faith was just a formality were hit by waves of crisis. But all this, everything, was not punishment. It was an act of love. A cry that, it said, "There is still time to return, but not much." And finally, I saw myself as a Jew, an observer, a man who had judged from the outside what he now saw from within. I also saw my heart tremble, not because I was wicked, but because I had been lukewarm and presumptuous. I had believed that appearance was substance, that knowledge was enough. But now everything was being sifted by heaven, and nothing, truly nothing, could remain hidden. Then I understood the shaking was not a chastisement. It was a last chance, a door opening between darkness and light. Those who remained undecided would be forced to choose. If the great shaking had separated true foundations from illusory ones, what came next was even more surprising. Because when everything seemed to collapse, something, or rather someone, began to emerge. Not with fanfare, not with triumphs, but with the disarming simplicity of a sprout breaking through a crack in the concrete. It was as if the Spirit were telling me, "Now look at whom I have prepared." While the world was not looking, I saw a dusty train station in the heart of India. A man with a worn gospel hidden under his shirt helped a blind old woman board a train. No one noticed him, no one shook his hand, but the sky above him shone as if anointed with invisible oil. I heard it said, "He served me in silence for 20 years. Now his voice will be like fire." Then a woman in the Philippines. She was dragging a bucket of water up a muddy slope. She had lost her husband and son, but every night she prayed for the pastors of America. No one had ever thanked her. No one had ever listened to her words. But now, as she walked, her footprints left golden marks on the earth. It was not fantasy. It was spiritual reality. The scene multiplied. Young former drug addicts testified on the street, not with memorized verses, but with tear-filled eyes and holy words. Unknown intercessors bent on their knees in stifling rooms with curved backs and upright souls. Children sang in clay huts, with voices so pure that even angels seemed to listen in silence. The awakening did not start from the stages, it started from the caves. And in those caves, God had hidden His most precious jewels. I was shown a huge mantle made of fire and heavenly cloth. It was lowered to the earth, but not over everyone, only over some, the hidden ones. Those who had never sought the platform, but only the presence. Those who had said yes when no one was watching. Who had chosen to remain faithful when it would have been easier to give up. And here was the miracle. When that mantle covered them, their words gained an irresistible force. They did not raise their voices, but every syllable penetrated consciences. Some laughed at them, but others fell to their knees, touched by the Spirit as if by a sword. One of them, an African boy with a handwritten Bible, entered a public school and, without saying a word, began to pray softly. One by one, the children stopped talking. A full silence filled the classroom. The teacher, a self. I was a proclaimed atheist. I covered my face and began to cry. No sermon, no programmed evangelism, just presence. Glory, the voice told me. The world looked to the stars. I looked to the wells. My hidden people are ready now. They will come to light, not to be celebrated, but to carry my name where others have been ashamed to utter it. And at that moment, for the first time, I felt a hunger within me that I had never known. Not hunger for knowledge nor for power, but hunger for living truth. Hunger for that simple, authentic faith that changes the world one glance at a time, one prayer at a time, one renunciation at a time. And I asked myself with fear and desire, Lord, am I one of your hidden ones? Or have I just been curious? I received no answer, only a silence full of sweetness. But I knew that question would stay with me for the rest of my life. The moment I returned to my body was not spectacular, nor accompanied by celestial sounds. It was like waking from a dream that had the weight of reality, and leaving a reality that now seemed only a dream. A gasping breath, a cold light, the dull sound of a heart monitor, and hands gently shaking me. I didn't know where I was nor when. Only after a few minutes did I realize I was in a hospital in Jerusalem, and that according to the doctors, I had been clinically dead for about 7 minutes. 7 minutes, which for me had been an eternity. I reopened my eyes with a different awareness, not just because I had seen, but because something in me had changed, as if my heart beat with a new rhythm, as if every breath contained an echo of the kingdom. The first face I saw was that of a young nurse with dark, tired eyes. She looked at me as one looks at someone who has returned from a place no one returns from. And in her eyes, I saw fear, but also a silent question. A question that would follow me wherever I went. What did you see? It took me days to speak, not for lack of words, but because I didn't know if the world was ready to hear them. I had always thought that faith was something theoretical, cultural, ethnic. But now I knew it was life or death, light or darkness, choice or indifference. I began to tell, first to my sister, who looked at me in silence for 40 minutes without interrupting, then to an old rabbi friend who listened with trembling hands. Finally, in the following weeks, to the people God placed in my path. I was not a preacher, I had not studied Christian theology, but what I had seen did not require a pulpit, only a heart willing to listen. And the message I carried was clear, not a theatrical prophecy, not a sensationalist apocalyptic announcement. No, it was an appeal, a warning, an urgent call to wake up. June 27, 2025, was not just a date. It was a signal, a line drawn in the invisible heavens separating what is authentic from what is illusory. The time of waiting is over. The time of neutrality has ended. Now you move forward or you fall behind. Now you choose or you are swept away. I had seen the transfer of spiritual authority. I had seen the acceleration of God's time. I had seen the fire descend, not to destroy but to purify. I had seen the unknown, the forgotten, the wounded, the humbled receive the weight of glory. I had seen the bride prepare herself while the actors left the stage. I had seen the awakening that resembled no human event because it began in the secret of the heart and ended in the cry of heaven. And now I simply had to live as a witness, not as an expert, not as an enlightened one, but as a man wounded by the truth. Because once you see spiritual reality as it is, you can no longer go back to sleep. Every morning since then, I wake up with the same prayer. Lord, give me ears to hear your step and eyes to recognize you, even when you come disguised as silence. And every evening before sleeping, I repeat to myself and to anyone who asks me if all this is true, just one sentence. I wasn't looking for God, but He was looking for me. And the day I met Him was June 27th, 2025. Thank you very much for following this testimony to the end. If you are still here, it is because something has deeply touched your spirit, and it is no coincidence. Every word you have heard may have been written for you. Now we ask you for a simple but powerful gesture. Write in the comments where in the world you are watching us from so we can pray for your nation and unite with you spiritually. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Every day we publish new revelations and messages that can awaken, strengthen, and guide souls in search of truth. And above all, share this video with at least 3 people you care about. A message from heaven, when it arrives at the right time, can change a life, rekindle faith, and bring a lost heart into the arms of God. May the Lord bless you, keep you, and always lead you on the path of light.